History 1. I'm 21, living in a small town nestled in the hills of eastern Kentucky. For as long as I can remember, I've been hiking and camping, exploring the rugged terrain of the Appalachian Range. My best buddy, Chuck, who lived a few miles down the road, often joined me on these adventures. Every fall we planned a big trip, usually lasting from a few days to a whole week, where we'd lose ourselves in the wilderness. In 2019, we set our sights on a trail that led to a secluded lake at the top of the mountains. As the days approached, Chuck had to bail out because of a work emergency. I'd already cleared my schedule for the week and had my gear packed, so I decided to go solo. On Monday morning, I drove to a nearby trailhead and began my journey. This wasn't your typical marked trail with signs and paths. It was a raw, untamed route where you had to rely on maps, compasses, and natural landmarks. You'd hike toward a distant rock formation or a ridge, then move on to the next visible landmark. The first 2 days were a steady climb toward a mountain ridge. When dusk fell on the second day, I set up camp, several hours short of the ridge. I pitched my tent, started a fire, and cooked up some food. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and it was around 8 when I crawled into my tent to read, leaving the fire burning outside. About 20 minutes later, over the sound of crackling flames, I heard a distinct snap of a stick right behind my tent. I jolted up, thinking it might be a black bear attracted by the smell of food. But there was no other sound. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the trees. Seeing nothing, I shouted, hoping to scare off any predators, but there was no response. It was eerie. The stick snapping had been unmistakable, as if something heavy had stepped on it. I stayed outside for a while, scanning the darkness before putting out the fire and returning to my tent. Sleep didn't come easy that night as I lay there listening for any noise. The next morning I was surprised to find I'd actually slept. I packed up and continued my trek, reaching the ridge by midday. From there it was a straight path to the lake. I moved quickly, aiming to reach it before nightfall so I wouldn't have to relocate my camp again. I arrived just as the sun was setting. The lake was a sight to behold, worth every step. I walked around, soaking in the beauty, then set up camp near the tree line. As I sat by the fire, I kept hearing faint noises from the trees behind me. It felt like footsteps, making me uneasy. I knew nobody else would be out here. I hadn't seen any signs of other campers. Darkness soon enveloped the surroundings, and my visibility dropped to just a few feet. I got into my tent, but the noises continued. They were soft, just beyond the range of certainty. Despite my nerves, exhaustion took over and I fell asleep. An hour later, I was jolted awake by the sound of someone running away from my tent. Heart pounding, I grabbed my flashlight and rushed outside. In the distance, I caught a glimpse of a figure disappearing into the night. I saw footprints circling my tent, evidence of someone lurking around. Terrified, I reignited the fire to see better and spent the rest of the night on high alert. At dawn, I took a few photos of the lake, packed up, and began my hike back. My plan had been to stay another day, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I made it back without further incident, but along the way, I noticed some items missing from my backpack, small things like food and tools. It dawned on me that whoever had been outside my tent might have rifled through my belongings while I slept. The very thought still sends shivers down my spine. History 2. I've always loved camping, especially in the fall when the leaves turn golden and the air gets crisp. So when my best friend, who I'll call Beth, asked me to go camping with her for her birthday, I jumped at the chance. We packed our gear and headed out to a secluded spot in the woods that Beth's family had been camping at for years. As we hiked in, I felt a sense of calm. It was like we were the only two people in the world. The hike wasn't too long, and when we reached the campsite, we got to work setting everything up. It only took about an hour. Afterward, we decided to explore the area. We headed pretty much straight north, off the beaten path, just wandering until we stumbled upon a faded trail. Beth had never seen it before and said there shouldn't be anything out here. She was puzzled. We followed the trail, winding through the woods until we found an old abandoned cabin. It was small, weather-beaten, with broken windows and a sagging roof. Beth was eager to explore, while I felt a bit hesitant but curious. We stepped inside. It was clear no one had been there for years. We poked around looking for interesting artifacts or clues about who had lived there, but we didn't find much. As we were about to leave, I noticed something strange. A small door in the corner of the cabin with a rusty padlock. I pointed it out to Beth, and our curiosity got the better of us. The lock looked ancient, completely rusted. I knocked on the door, even though I knew no one would be inside. Beth went outside and grabbed a large rock, handing it to me. I smashed the lock, and after a few good hits, it broke open. The door dragged against the ground as we pulled it back. Inside, it was pitch black. Beth shined her flashlight through the doorway, revealing a staircase leading down. We were both creeped out but assured ourselves that nobody had been here for years, so there was nothing to fear. I led the way down the steep staircase, which wasn't very long, just 8 to 10 steps, before it opened into a room. What we saw was disturbing. There were several small mattresses on the ground, along with some other random furniture. They looked modern, like they were less than 5 years old. Something about it filled me with fear. We rushed back upstairs, shut the door, and stood there, unsure of what we had just seen. We debated whether it could be a crime scene because everything seemed so out of place. As we were talking, Beth suddenly shushed me. In the distance, we heard footsteps approaching the cabin. They came right up to it but walked past without stopping. I could see the confusion on Beth's face, too. As soon as the footsteps faded, we ran back to our campsite, packed up, and headed straight to Beth VGJ TM's place. We called the police just in case. To us, the fact that the person didn't stop at the cabin meant they were familiar with it. We didn't know if it was due to something bad, so we let the police decide. The police searched the cabin and the surrounding area but found nothing that led to any answers. They said it was strange and seemed like something bad had happened, but there was no evidence to support that. It became a big topic in our town, with everyone speculating about what the cabin had been used for. Eventually, the city decided to tear down the cabin to prevent people from visiting it. The mystery has never been solved, and it probably never will be. But deep down, I know something awful must have happened there. History 3. Every year as a kid, my family would go on these big camping trips. I was always really excited because we lived in New Mexico, where there's pretty much nothing, and we'd camp in Oregon. Seeing trees and grass was my favorite part, but I also got to see all my cousins. Even though we only saw each other a couple times a year, we were really close. My favorite cousin, who was more like a brother to me, was Sam. He was a year older than me, and we were inseparable when together. Because of what happened, we became even closer after that camping trip. I think it took us both a while to understand what really went on and what more could have happened to us. It started when we had been there for 2 days already. Most of our family was either in the lake or by the campfire talking. Sam didn't like to swim, so we decided to play in the woods instead. We played a version of tag called Bandit. We'd switch off being the cop and chase the other one, who was the bandit, until we caught them. We would play for hours, but in the woods it's easy to just keep running and not know where you're going. We tried our best to stay within viewing distance, but when Sam started chasing me with a huge stick, I guess my adrenaline kicked in. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually I ended up at an old-looking trailer. Sam wasn't far behind, but I remember him throwing the stick down, his focus now on what we both assumed was an abandoned trailer. We discussed investigating it further, and I'm not really sure why, but we decided not to. We started walking back, but didn't really know where we were going. Probably about 10 minutes into our walk, we saw a couple coming towards us, pushing a shopping cart full of stuff. The woman approached us and was really nice while the man stayed back. She asked if we were lost, who we were with, our names, and ages. I remember when we told her how old we were, she looked back at the guy and then to us again. She told us we didn't have to be scared and she'd help us find our way home after they dropped off their stuff at their campsite. She said we could also make s'mores if we wanted. Sam and I were hesitant, but she seemed really nice, and it was still daytime, so for some reason, that made everything way less suspicious. In my 7-year-old brain, bad people only did things at night, so we were fine. We walked with them for a while, following them back to their camp. While she and Sam were talking, I glanced over at the shopping cart. It was filled with a bunch of rusty metal things and what looked like nothing new. Nothing was in bags. Everything just looked like trash they'd found somewhere. I started to get really uncomfortable, and I could tell Sam was too. Every time I'd look over at the guy, he was never smiling, and sometimes he'd be staring at me with a blank look. This was 18 years ago, and I still remember how creepy he looked. We walked a bit further until the trailer came back into view. The woman grabbed Sam's and my hands and asked if we were excited for s'mores. Suddenly I heard Sam's name being called, then mine. We all stopped for a second, and the lady squeezed my hand a bit tighter. She asked something to the guy, along the lines of what they should do. He responded, but I don't remember what he said. The lady started to turn us toward the trailer while holding us tighter and speeding up into a sort of fast walk. I looked back and saw my sister through the trees. Without hesitation, I yelled her name, and the lady immediately let go of my hand. Sam and I ran to her as she made her way towards us. My sister yelled to the others that she'd found us. My mom and dad thanked the couple, who had told them this elaborate story about how they'd been trying to find our parents for a while now and that we were such sweet boys and everything. I remember my parents inviting the couple over for burgers, but thankfully they declined. I think because the lady was so nice and that we were found safe, my parents didn't think twice. I do recall my dad and uncle talking about how creepy the guy was, though. My cousin and I ended up telling my sister, who found us, that the couple was weird, but I don't think she understood what we meant. It wasn't until my cousin and I were old enough to understand that some people have really bad intentions. We talked about it again in depth and both came to the conclusion that by the looks of it, they were tight on money and were probably going to sell us or something. For years growing up, I had kept this from my parents because I was supposed to be the strong man of the family, and thinking about that time made me feel gross and preyed upon. Sam also felt embarrassed as he was older than me and felt he had failed to protect me. We eventually told our parents a few years ago, but I wish we had told them immediately and maybe something could have been done. Nowadays, I never let my kids out of my sight and always let them know that they can tell me anything without fear of being judged, especially my son.